Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Joining us on the line is Romina Boccia. She's a leading fiscal and economic expert directing the Grover Hermann Center for the Federal Budget at the Heritage Foundation.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So we have seen the Democrats pushing this $3 trillion boondoggle. We've already spent $7 trillion from the Federal Reserve and the Federal Congress over the course of the last 6 weeks. Now they want another $3 trillion. So what is in this thing that is so all-fired important that we pass?
You know, there really is everything in it. It's a wish list of partisan Democratic priorities. It really is a good blueprint for a radical progressive agenda. It spans over 1,800 pages. I've done the math. If members of Congress read about 50 pages an hour, meaning they did nothing else, it would take them 12 hours straight for 3 days to get through this bill. So what's in it? You name it. Student loan forgiveness, state and local government bailouts, an extension of the unemployment bonus program that is paying Americans more to stay home than to go to work, and a lot more than that.
So when we look at the worst provisions of this, one of the worst provisions is this attempt to bail out states. Senator Rick Scott's been very vocal about this from Florida, pointing out that basically states are not asking for help in paying bills on coronavirus-related issues. What they're really doing is avoiding responsibility for their own fiscal irresponsibility over time. They have all these pensions they can't pay out. They've run out of unemployment payments because they have already spent too much money. What is the case that is being... I've heard that the White House is actually sort of warm toward the idea of bailing out the states. Is that something that's actually going to happen here?
I really hope not. We heard Senator McConnell really draw a red line here, saying that any states and localities that had trouble paying their bills might consider bankruptcy, but they shouldn't look to Washington for bailouts. And I think this is exactly the right tune to take, because you're absolutely right. This would be unfair, bailing out some states that have been acting fiscally irresponsibly with excessive union contracts that are simply unaffordable. And it would come at the cost of taxpayers in other states like Wyoming, Texas, and Florida that have gotten their fiscal house in order and that have built up rainy day funds. So state and local bailouts should be an absolute non-starter. They would just backfill union pension plans and keep states and localities from doing the right thing, which would be at this point looking at their budgets, prioritizing what's essential, and trimming some of the fat. And if they did that, they wouldn't need a bailout nor declare bankruptcy.
So what are the other provisions here that we should be deeply worried about? Aside from these state bailouts, you know, there's obviously some talk about signing checks to illegal immigrants, among other things. Well, what exactly is that controversy about?
So if you recall, Americans got these rebate checks, $1,200 per individual, $2,400 for families, and then an extra $500 for every dependent. And those checks, that first round that went out was restricted. It couldn't go to illegal immigrants and non-resident aliens. The Democrats didn't like that. They want to provide those checks to everyone, regardless of their status in this country. And so this will be a second round of those checks. But the first round already was very troubling because it wasn't targeted. Americans got the money whether they were affected by this crisis or not, meaning did they actually lose income or were they able to work from home? There are better ways of providing relief to individuals. But one of the worst ways, actually, that this bill would expand is this unemployment bonus provision that pays $600 a week in addition to what individuals are otherwise eligible for, which has now resulted in an average of $1,000 per week going to folks who are unemployed, with many businesses struggling to call their workers back, even as parts of the country are opening back up and businesses are trying to get back up and running. They're having trouble getting their workers back to work because unemployment is paying them more than they were able to earn while they were on the job. That's just a really bad incentive, and it's fundamentally un-American and unfair for those essential workers that never caught a break, that had to work through this entire crisis. That policy needs to go. We shouldn't pay people more to be unemployed than to go to work.
Now, how long are Democrats looking to extend the unemployment as well? I believe they're trying to extend the period in which you can receive this extended unemployment until January, which is fully insane. If we're locked down until January, the economy is finished. I mean, there is no more American economy if we're all locked down until January.
I agree with you. They do want to extend it through January, and then there's a trigger that, depending on economic conditions, it might actually be expanded through March. We've calculated this would be roughly $32,000 in those benefits per individual who qualifies. We currently have roughly 30 million Americans on unemployment, which is Depression-era levels. And as parts of the country are starting to reopen, as we know, not all counties are affected equally. This coronavirus has hit some parts of the country much worse than others. In those areas where it's safe to reopen and for people to go back to work, that's really what's going to get American society back up and running and will lift the American spirit so much more than any more government handouts.
We're speaking with Romina Boccia. She's a leading fiscal and economic expert directing the Grover M. Hermann Center for the Federal Budget at the Heritage Foundation. So some of the talk that's come up, Romina, about this sort of spending, and we are blowing out the spending no matter what happens here, is talk about the national debt. How much should we be worried about that? Because, I've talked to experts who have basically suggested that right now the interest rate on the debt that we are taking out is exorbitantly low, that if you're going to take out debt, now is the time to do it, that basically we are the strongest horse and people are going to continue to buy our debt because they have no other place to put their money. So should we really be worried about deficit spending at this point, or should we just sort of suck it up and recognize that, maybe sometime down the road we're going to have to pay it off, but in all likelihood, this is just, another bump in the road?
There was some deficit spending that I think was necessary to do during this crisis to provide a floor under people, try to keep the economy frozen in place while governments got their testing and tracing up and running so we could handle this virus responsibly. But at this point, it doesn't mean that we should spend recklessly, because the status of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency is a tremendous boon and benefit to the American people and our country. But it's not something that we can rely on forever, especially if our lawmakers will be fiscally irresponsible and reckless with our finances. That status is not a given. That could change. So we shouldn't abuse it, and we should be doing what's necessary now to get the economy back up and running, protecting public health. This is why we have at the Heritage Foundation put together a National Recovery Commission at nationalcoronaviruscommission.com, where we have put forth almost by now 200 recommendations for leaders at all levels of government to reopen America safely, to protect both lives and livelihoods. And that's more important now than just spending more money, especially keep in mind a lot of this money is being printed, so we do have to, maybe not now, but worry about inflation in the future.
Romina Boccia, leading fiscal and economic expert at the Heritage Foundation. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.